Hello, my name is Sarah Gonda, and today I'm going to be talking about how the role of the First Lady of the United States has evolved throughout history. The First Lady has a very unique but often overlooked position, as she's very influential, but she's often pushed behind other political leaders. So for my historiographic essay, I looked at 4 different sources to help me establish this historical evolution along with how successful each First Lady was. So I broke down the 45 First Ladies into distinct historical time periods in order to help observe this evolution. So before I go into those time periods, it's important that I mention that within each group there are exceptions, and sometimes these exceptions were women who were way ahead of their time and really helped advance the role of the First Lady, while other times these exceptions were ladies who really lagged behind the rest of the group that they were in and really didn't help advance the role. So the first group I'm going to talk about are the early First Ladies, and they range from Martha Washington, who's pictured here, to Louisa Johnson. And these women were very influential as they helped set the precedence of what the First Lady's role should be. And for the most part, they fulfilled ceremonial duties and duties of the White House hostess. And according to Karen O'Connor, who is a government professor from the American University, she stated that Dolly Madison, who's pictured here, really set those standards of what the ceremonial duties and the hostess duties of the First Lady should be. So for the most part, this group really mirrored a typical housewife, and this could be due to the fact that since it was such a new role, they weren't sure how influential they should be or how much they should step outside their gender roles. There is one exception to this group, and that is Abigail Adams, who is pictured in the center. And she had an immense amount of political influence on her husband, and that's well shown through her famous Remember the Ladies letter that she wrote to him. So as you can see, this group, they weren't as politically influential, but they were still very influential in establishing what the role of the First Lady was. So the next group ranges from Rachel Jackson to Julia Grant, and this period was an era of stagnation. And according to O'Connor, along with Robert P. Watson, who's a political science professor from the University of Hawaii Hilo, and Betty Boyd Crowley, who is a First Lady historian, all 3 of these authors observed that a majority of the women in this group had suffered from illness, had either died before their husbands became president or shortly after their husbands became president, or had been suffering from grief due to the death of close relatives. And what's often unknown to most people about this time period was that in our history, a lot of people who actually fulfilled the role of First Lady were actually substitutes and weren't married to the president. They were nieces, daughters, or friends of the president, and they were usually in their late teens and their early 20s. And pictured here is Mary Fillmore, who was actually 18 years old when she fulfilled the role of the First Lady because her mother was ill during her father's presidency. So there are 3 exceptions to this group: Sarah Polk, along with Mary Lincoln and Julia Grant, as they were very public roles and they had a lot of political influence with their husband and were very important partners to their husbands. So the next group ranges from Lucy Hayes to Ida McKinley, who's pictured here. And what's very significant about this group, according to Watson, was that they are the first group of First Ladies with college educations, and this goes along with the time period that they served, as women were really starting to become more prominent in society during this time. They were also very popular and well-liked by the American people, but despite having these college educations, they really fell short in using these strengths to advance the role of the First Lady, as they mostly conformed to ceremonial duties and hostess duties, and that's why I titled this group Missed Opportunities. So next, from 1901 to 1933, we start to see the beginnings of change within the role of the First Lady. This was also the time period in which feminism and the women's movement were very prominent. And according to Crowley, we start to see the early signs of First Ladies having their own political work. And they also formally supported women's rights, which also goes along with the time period. And they really began to slowly step outside the shadow of the president during this time. And probably the most notable contribution from this group of First Ladies comes from Edith Wilson. During President Wilson's second term, he suffered from a stroke and was unable to perform the duties of the president. So instead of the vice president stepping in, Edith Wilson actually performed the duties of the president while he was recovering. And this picture here shows her helping him sign documents shortly after he had his stroke. One exception to this group is Grace Coolidge, and she was very controlled and restricted by her husband, so she wasn't able to exert as much influence in the beginnings of these changes. So next we have the catalyst who set the standard and established the political role of the First Lady, and that is Eleanor Roosevelt. Part of the reason she's so influential is the fact that she is the longest serving First Lady in American history, serving from 1933 to 1945. And according to Watson, she's still the standard by which all First Ladies are measured to today, and many strive to be just as significant as she was and as influential as she was. She was very much ahead of her times in terms of gender roles, and she wasn't afraid to voice her opinions, and oftentimes those opinions would disagree with those of her husband, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, and which was very significant. She also served as a substitute for FDR as he had polio during his time in office, so she would travel and campaign on his behalf, and she was the first lady to do this. She's also very controversial as she supported civil rights and social issues, especially those of African Americans. And what's also extremely significant is that she continued her activism beyond the role of the First Lady, eventually becoming a delegate to the United Nations. So from 1945 to 1974, we start to see the role of the First Lady become more supportive rather than independent. And according to Watson, this was also the first full group that actually traveled and campaigned on behalf of their husbands. This was also the time period in which mass media started to become very prevalent. So the First Ladies had to adapt to a more public role, and they became celebrities and had this role model status. And this celebrity and role model status was easily exemplified through Jackie Kennedy, as she really fulfilled that. They also had to establish the female archetype or model, and this is seen in the 1950s, according to Crowley, through Mamie Eisenhower, who's pictured here, as she fulfilled a stereotypical 1950s housewife, and many other women really followed suit with that in America. And then because it had such public roles, they mostly took on non-controversial projects such as Jackie Kennedy's White House refurbishment project and Lady Bird Johnson's Beautification of America, and Lady Bird's pictured right here. And then from 1974 to 1993, we start to see the shaping of the new role of the First Lady and the development of the modern day First Lady. And the women in this group are Betty Ford, Rosalind Carter, Nancy Reagan, and Barbara Bush. This was also the official beginning of the so-called pet projects of the First Ladies. And basically a pet project is just a platform or the issues that First Ladies choose to advocate for during their time in office. So Betty Ford advocated for the passage of the Equal Rights Amendment and also tried to raise awareness for breast cancer. Rosalind Carter tried to raise awareness for mental health. Nancy Reagan had her Just Say No to Drugs campaign, and Barbara Bush advocated for literacy. Also, according to Watson, this was the first time in which we start to see the First Ladies really become political partners to their presidents, and they weren't just solely a First Lady. And they also formed their own agendas and promoted their own causes through these pet projects. So the last group I'm going to talk about are most recent First Ladies, and they're Hillary Clinton, Laura Bush, and Michelle Obama. So these women are dubbed as co-presidents, as they are key advisors and vital assets to the president, and they have an immense amount of political influence in making decisions and are very important to the executive branch and to the White House. This group is also very significant as these women are the most educated group of First Ladies in American history, with both Michelle and Hillary having doctorate degrees and then Laura having a master's degree. And according to Crowley, they had a significant political role in shaping the nation, not only through their pet projects but also through many other causes, such as Laura Bush, who not only advocated for her pet project of education but also advocated for women's rights in Afghanistan after 9/11. And then Michelle Obama not only had her pet project of childhood obesity, but also advocated for LGBT rights. So what's also extremely significant about this group is that they've all remained involved in politics since leaving the office of First Lady, and this is heavily exemplified through Hillary Clinton and her bid to run for president this past election. So how successful were the First Ladies? So this chart comes from my last source, from PJ Media, and it's very difficult to establish how successful First Ladies are because it's subjective, but this author does attempt to do so, and this chart does provide a basis for comparing the projects. So This author looked at the First Ladies from 1933 to 2017 and evaluated how significant each project was during the time period it existed, along with how successful each First Lady was, and gave them each the significance and the success score on a scale of 1 to 10, and then multiplied those two scores to generate an overall score. So there were some exclusions from the overall rankings that are still seen on the chart, and labeled in red are two power First Ladies, Eleanor Roosevelt and Hillary Clinton, who extended their influence way beyond just a single project and mostly advocated for changing national policy. And then two non-participating First Ladies are labeled in gray, and that's Mamie Eisenhower and Bess Truman, as they had no projects. So looking at this chart, if Eleanor Roosevelt and Hillary Clinton were included in the overall rankings, Eleanor would be the most successful First Lady, followed by Hillary Clinton. But excluding them, you would see Lady Bird Johnson, who was actually very successful with her beautification of America, followed by Nancy Reagan and her Just Say No to Drugs campaign, and then Laura Bush followed with her education campaign. And then what's also important to note is that Michelle Obama is not given a success score, since this came from an article from 2010. And it's going to take a while for us to be able to establish how successful she truly was. But what's important to know is that her significance score 6 is very high among the other First Ladies. So, as you can see, the role of the First Lady has evolved from a hostess to a humanitarian activist, and the trend of the political role of the First Lady did not begin to occur until the early 1900s, and by the 1970s we start to see the full-fledged modern First Lady rise. And this role did not develop rapidly nor consistently, and the pace of advancement correlates to the time period in which each First Lady served. So clearly the role of the First Lady has evolved from those of ceremonial duties to a very important political figure, not only to our nation but to the rest of the world. And these are resources. And are there any questions?